Good afternoon, everyone, and it's so lovely to be here. It's a great privilege to be amongst people who are working with old recordings and thinking about what they can tell us about performance in the past and how they might feed into performance going forward. My name is Neal Costa. I'm lead chief investigator on an Australian Research Council funded project called The Shock of the Old, and we're sort of rediscovering the sounds of bel canto roughly between 1700 and 1900. I have with me Anna Fraser and Claire Burrell-McDonald, who are both wonderful professional singers in their own right. They do a whole range of different things, but they also decided that they'd like to investigate, and so they've become doctoral students on the program. And I'd like to thank Inya and Ava up front for organising this conference, the many other conferences they've done, and ERA, which is just such a wonderful organisation to have in the world right now. This is not actually so much of a lecture recital. You're not going to hear us predominantly performing for you. We are going to do a few little live demonstrations as we go on, but predominantly what we're trying to do is to show you. We had this experience of coming here and making 10 wax disc recordings last December, and it was absolutely fascinating what we learned from it, how we interacted with Inya, who knew so much about the process for us. And we've then since had quite a lot going on. The girls will tell you about our recent trip to Vienna just before we came here and the revelations that have come from that. And this is really focusing on what we can hear in the recordings once we know certain bits of information, which is really important. So the purpose of the bel canto research has been to look at ways of extrapolating singing styles, going backwards in time from the early recording era to the 18th century. While that may seem ambitious and possibly even impossible, it is important to note that when we're doing this to expand expressivity in singing, for me in piano playing, and what possibilities we can bring to performances today and into the future, and hopefully change things like singing pedagogy. We're certainly not saying that we know how things sounded the further back we go, but it's a way of really approaching artistic research and experimentation. So we offer this in the spirit of that. And I'm going to say not much more. Over to you guys.
We're going to start with an example of an early recording, and we'll have a listen to a short excerpt from Mozart's Le Nozze di Figaro. So we had the opportunity to record this onto wax in December, and we're slight changes to how we were able to capture it. Of course, we didn't have an orchestra to accompany us. However, Neal did a slight recreation of the part, and we're going to have just a fresh listen to what it sounds like recording on wax in the 21st century. Okay, so without saying anything about what we're doing with the emulation practice, does it sound like we're 19th century singers when it's imprinted onto wax? Something very charming about the whole sound world, and it definitely sounds antique. But the purpose is not to create antique sounds, of course, understand what we're doing with the process to be able to really get insight into what their expressivity is like, what type of tonal colours, etc. So we have this little formula that we have this emulation process where we're imitating and we're trying to capture all the expressive devices that these ladies are doing to do with language, all these different things, and then the sliding effects and how it's coordinated. But of course, we can hear this, there's a density issue as well. So we actually have to try and work out different ways of imprinting this information onto the wax, and we'll discover this through this process. So the recording emulation onto the wax does provide us these insights, but it's also simultaneously capturing and recording through microphones in the situation that we had in December. So we actually want to understand also if it was a case of these ladies who had done a production together back in 1905, I think it was, where they recorded in 1908. What was their sonic experience in the recording room? And we've tried to recreate or understand how the microphone recordings that were capturing us while we were doing the wax recordings gives us a bit more insight as to what they were doing possibly within their own practice. So I have included this little spectrogram. I would like some discussion possibly at the end if we think it's relevant. It was just some quick images that we extracted of the original Solaria and then our version. I suppose we can see that there's some similarities in the harmonics through there, but let's come back to that because that was very fresh from the last sort of day or two, thinking, is this kind of relevant information? But we are looking at spectral sounds, we are looking at colours, tonal colours, and the way that those effects speak to those things. So these were all the recordings that we did in December, and there were a couple of purposes, mixed purposes. So we actually had some direct recording emulations at the top. Then in orange, we actually have this overlap where we've got an example where I used an early recording example, I overlaid the details, and then we actually recreated or reimagined something with expressive detail from earlier sources. And then the latter part of the list is these extrapolations, so using source information, didactic information, to inform how our practices might sonically result, but also referencing, the early recordings and those practices. So it's trying to find a way further back in time because we don't have the early recording evidence for certain examples.
Can I just interject? So,
of course.
I mean, as you all know, the purpose is for us to be able to use late bel canto singing, so of trained singers who were born before the 1850s, to investigate how they made those types of sounds that we hear on the recordings, and then to overlay that type of sound world with what we find in the didactic sources, which in some cases are very detailed. The Manuel Garcia, Domenico Corri's work, and this way we think can actually tell us something about how singing might have sounded at the beginning of the 19th century, for example.
So today we're going to focus on an emulation example. We had the duet at the beginning, but we've sort of moved on from that now. So we're going to have a solo emulation and understand what's happening there. Then we're going to also look at the sort of hybrid version, which is the overlay with the expressive detail from the past. And then we have our extrapolative examples. So we're going to use the Manuel Garcia examples of the Cimarosa and the Modellacchi as our basis because we have just been exploring these in Vienna. Okay, so these are some images from our December experience right in this room here. And I thought it would just be interesting to sort of have make a few comments about what we were exploring because this was very new to us and we had the assistance of Duncan and Inya. But of course it was very, it was a whirlwind trying to sort of put all that information down. And we sort of talked about different parameters and opportunities, but we didn't fully understand exactly what we were trying to achieve until sort of after the fact, and you can start to see the visual image as well as sort of hear what those contrasts were between the wax and between the microphone recordings. I should also say with the microphone recordings that we hear today, I have actually just done a very equal blend of the microphones that were in the room because I didn't want to tamper or EQ or put any subjectivity on top of the recordings. Of course, then we also have this very special medium, and I'd like to hear more about this from Duncan after we sort of talk about different things. But what we were doing in situ was sort of really EQing ourselves based on what speaks into the horn. You know, the distance from the horn, as well as how we can allow the piano to be heard. There were different effects that we used, making sure that the alignment's all correct, but also we've now discovered that, you know, there are possibly aspects of vowel modification or chiaroscuro that came into play with these singers, that they were really sort of manipulating the light and shade in their performance live, but in fact that's possibly one of the elements that we missed in our recordings in December, because now there's been some revelation. Yes, which will come soon. So fresh insights, yeah, these are the sorts of things. How does this colour play in the production of sound, and does that sort of cause various spikes in the wax, in the recordings? Also, is there harmonic interplay with the horn, as well as what we can do to really bring out all the expressive effects and how they speak onto the wax? Still a learning process. Would you like to talk about some of the results?
Yeah, so we were very, very lucky to come and do, I think it was 10 discs last December, and we were actually very lucky in that we had the opportunity to do a couple of test runs. We are very spoilt in the modern world. We get to walk into a recording studio and we get to listen back to things. It's not a thing you can generally do with wax recordings. Certainly the early singers didn't get the opportunity to do so. They had to wait, was it 2 or 3 weeks? For their recordings to be processed so they could listen back to them. So we got the opportunity to do, I think it was probably a 15 to 20 second test for each disc that we did. And Duncan's advice, which is very good advice, was to find the point of overload in the test. So you found the extremes of each individual piece, and then that gave you a gauge for how to mediate our performance in the moment, which is, you know, was quite tricky when you get one shot and you're very conscious of that. So Anna and I will speak to what we found about the voice, and then Neal will make a few comments about his experience with modifying his pianistic performance. We found that the best results came in the middle voice from having a quite rich and quite warm core, and then really finding out the detail at the extremes of the voice. If we were too delicate with the detail, it actually just didn't speak, and you will hear on some of the examples we have later points where we didn't get it quite right. It was also about mediating the distance from the horn. There was a sweet spot of about 25 to 30 centimetres from the horn, and you had a very narrow range of motion. You know, we're singers, we move in performance, but we couldn't do that because otherwise you'd be a couple of centimetres outside and you just get this absolute drop off in the sound. One of the things that Duncan was able to show us was that actually when you found extremes of sound on the discs, that had a corresponding physical indentation in the wax. And so you could do a visual inspection of the wax discs to give us a better gauge on how we were doing, whether we were going to blow out the sound, whether it just wasn't speaking. It's also an interesting, there was some sound feedback from the sweet spot in the horn. And Anna might be able to speak to this as well, but there was a point where, as singers, we're used to interacting with the room. We could also interact with the horn, and you did get, there was a sweet spot of resonance where the horn spoke. There was a lovely midpoint of resonance that really, in the moment, felt very clear and very present, and that was a really useful guide for how we were singing to the wax. Do you want to add anything?
Well, I think we should probably move on to our research questions so we can kind of start to listen to a few examples and maybe talk about them in situ. But here are our research questions that sort of have evolved and are connected to some of the things we're trying to discover. So how did it feel to record vocal works with a piano accompaniment onto wax discs? We were talking about that. To what degree can our expressive practices be heard on the wax as compared to simultaneously produced electrical recordings? And what elements of our performance practices were modified to suit the wax disc recording process? To what extent does the wax recording capture our musical intentions? And I suppose the last one is the most important because we don't know. That's part of the process with understanding the early recordings. We don't know what their intentions are, and whether you look at piano rolls or whether you look at wax or cylinder, we actually don't know the intent behind it. So we are trying to borrow those ideas and then apply that to our own craft. So here's our project details. If you're interested in finding out more about it, the Bel Canto Rediscovered is a great site. And then our methodology. So throughout our practice, we have here reimagining the historical singing styles. And there are a number of components, our steps that take us through the process. But essentially, we're all trying to sort of get back further, extrapolating historical styles through our artistic creativity. And this is kind of core to, I think, everyone in this room. We can kind of analyse and compare and all that sort of stuff, but how does that actually come into play? How do we actually put that into practical application? So, what do we mean by bel canto, Claire? Tell us.
So we've already touched on this a number of times this morning. I think the biggest point to note is, as has been identified, that bel canto is used for a whole range of things in a whole range of ways. Brianna Robertson-Kirkland makes a really interesting point in that it's used two ways. There is the florid and brilliant school of singing, which was the 17th and 18th centuries, and then it was used again to describe this 20th century revival movement. So for people like Joan Sutherland, Maria Callas, Luciano Pavarotti, who are generations removed from the actual bel canto. In terms of what it actually is, it was first used to describe a nostalgia for a time that was already gone. It was this florid, brilliant Italian school. And so when we talk about bel canto, that's actually what we mean. James Stark identifies it as a complex way of singing in which a number of different vocal aspects of performance and of technique interact. The big one there is chiaroscuro. We've dropped it a couple of times already. We'll talk a little bit more about it shortly. But register balance, suppleness of tone, a controlled vibrato or a trembling effect. Robert Toft then goes on to point out that it's the interplay of all these techniques. There's no one formula, really simple formula for bel canto. It is how each individual singer plays with these expressive devices and techniques that forms both their own identity as a bel canto singer and the overall movement. Just on the point about Brianna Robertson-Kirkland, the 20th century revival of bel canto, Christoph Meyer, who's a professor at MDW in Vienna, described that movement as the neo-bel canto, and I think that's a really good way of looking at it. It's a nod to the modern way of singing of permanently lowered larynx, privileging tone over textual communication, all those things with which everyone in this room is probably pretty familiar, I think.
Yeah, so now we can identify so many things in those early recordings, and we've highlighted chiaroscuro today because this is very much our topic for the week in our travels here to the other side of the world. Of course, chiaroscuro is heard in art, this term that we can using light and shade to create volume and depth and drama. And it's not so dissimilar in what was happening with the vocal technique. So referring to the balance of light, brilliance and ringing sound, as well as dark, rich and warm sounds. We have the chiaro and the scuro. And so this actually has been referenced back to 1592. So we also have references by Mancini in 1774, and then Manuel Garcia, who is our sort of point of reference because we have so much descriptive information in his sources from 1847. And even though he doesn't use the term in his publications, we do get this lovely summary when there's actually a publication in 1894 of his treatise in English by his sister. And this sort of sums it up, that we have these vocal shades and timbres, but you know, there are different names, express modifications of sonority in the voice. And I definitely think this is being heard in every other instrument as well. You know, it's a textural, it's a tactile thing. It's something that has been played with articulation. With voices, we're using something that can't really be seen. So it's pharyngeal and laryngeal. So we're talking about register. We're talking about tessitura. We're talking about range, and the way that we actually manipulate the vowel colours as you transition and try to actually sort of map, I suppose, a way to create the most sonorous sound, or make clear distinction between, say, a chiaro, where you're very deliberately expressing the text and are really highlighting the text, or whether there are, more decorative elements, but there's still this interplay constantly of trying to find, the most sonorous, sweetest, and the word painting opportunities. So these are really, really core things to the bel canto. Yes, Neal?
I'm going to add something in here because I think it's apt right now. While we were in Vienna with Christoph Meyer, and by the way, anyone who wants to go to an absolute magician, go visit him, go sing to him, take your singer with you. He'll just change your life. But what he brought out for us was that really from the 18th century right through to the end of the 19th century, if you look through all the treatises on singing, whether it be in German-speaking lands or even in France, you'll find that they all have the same types of exercises for singers to do, and singers would generally be doing these exercises where you leap from low notes to high notes through a kind of what would have been a yodel if you're going through the register, but you sing the low note chiaro and the high note scuro, so very, very open in the lower part and then really dark in the upper part. That was standard, and also when you went up scales, that was what you do. The high notes would generally be in the scuro sound, and the low notes quite opposite to what modern singing is all about, where the high notes are the loudest and the brightest and that sort of thing. This did not change, according to him. He's looked through all of the treatises. That type of singing did not change until really the 20th century, and it swapped over in the first years of the 20th century. So essentially, I think we could say with some confidence that what we're hearing on early recordings of proper, bel canto trained singers gives us an inkling going back quite a long way, and that's actually quite a revelation. When you have that, you think, okay, we can get somewhere with this.
So let's have a listen to Marchesi, and Marchesi is part of the Garcia teaching lineage. So we'll just hear some.
Just want to tell us that. Yeah.
Yes, so this is a wax cylinder recording, yes. And this will be one of the emulation examples, but we'll just hear a little bit of the original so you kind of understand.
So we might show you the emulated version, and then I might speak about some of the different things that we can hear on those recordings. So this is my emulation of Blanche Marchesi onto wax. One of the things I've found immediately arresting about Blanche Marchese's recording was the extraordinary use of the vibrato and the messa di voce. It is the total opposite of what we would be asked to do as 20th and 21st century trained singers. Extraordinary weightiness into cadences, but coupled with this quite amazing brilliance of tone in the upper register, and this very, it's a filigree, it's an almost fluty trembling effect. And so that was one of the things that I really focused on and worked quite hard on trying to emulate in the original. And so having listened back to modern recordings of my own emulation in the emulation process, that was one of the things that, was quite hard to achieve. The different colorations in the bottom register, and it's very, very fruity down the bottom and then really slims out up the top. Vibrazione, messa di voce, but on a smaller scale on individual notes for emphasis. So what speaks and what doesn't? The trembling effects on the recording seem to speak actually quite a lot faster than I remember them in the performance body, which is a sort of interesting point that I'd like to do a bit more thinking about. Some of the expressive effects, certainly some of the portamenti speak really, really well, and I was really happy with those. Again, if I was going to go back and do it again, I'd probably think a bit differently about the coloration, and again, we've just been doing some work on the chiaro and the scuro, which puts that into a whole new light. But what we might show you now is the electoral recording, just so you can get some idea of how it might have sounded and felt at the time.
What's going on in the room?
Yeah.
What's going on in the room?
So the most immediate thing you notice is the balance between the voice and the piano, and I'm not sure if anyone else in this room has done any recording onto wax. Kate's nodding, you know what I'm about to say. One of the things we hadn't expected was the degree to which the actual physical body of the singer affected the balance, because we actually had to physically move out of the way in order to get a great deal of the piano into the horn. And Neal, I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
I'll just say, you heard me there arpeggiating everything, and I probably wouldn't do quite as much as that in a performance. Maybe I would, but what I found was, listening to the tests, and not just in this piece, but actually in the others, is that the more I asynchronized, the more I heard of the piano. Somehow, sometimes my notes would come just before the singing sound and be after as well in the kind of envelope. And that, I felt, encouraged me to do more, and I think that's quite an interesting thing. And also with the arpeggiations, my ego was bruised because I couldn't be heard in the test, and so I was really going for it. And actually, Inya had to say to me, just calm down, don't have to play so loudly. try on that piano, try and find the depth of the sound while playing, so that it's not a kind of bashy sound, but actually a ringing sound. So this is very interesting to experience that.
So our next example, Voi che sapete, is this hybrid, and we might just have a really quick listen to the party, unless everyone in this room has already heard the party. Everyone heard the party? You must have heard the party. Everyone's nodding.
Well,
would you like
just hear
little bit, okay.
You can always hear Patty.
You can always hear Patty.
to go to
I
there.
just had to go to the chest because this is relevant to my explorations. You can hear all the expressive heads, you can hear the tempo rubato, you can hear the slides, you can hear the tremolos. There's lots of little graces. And so we're using now this example of Corrie's. And what I've done here in this example is I've overlaid all Pati's articulation, and then I've tried to accommodate all the expressive effects as well as the decoration that Corrie has done. So let's have a listen to this. This is my version on wax. There we are. Oh, you can stop at that one. Great. Okay, so as you can hear, I'm really trying to capture Pati's sound, but of course I'm not Pati, and I think within the wax recording opportunity, then I seem to be close to what she's doing. But when you listen just maybe briefly to the in-room scenario, then it definitely sounds like me and not Pati, because there's another spectral level, right? A couple of phrases. Okay, so you kind of get the picture that that's me and not Pati. But what have we lost in the process, or what do we gain by, understanding these wax recordings? Because we do hear lots of different things. We're moving on from this. Great. Okay, so now we have
1 minute each.
1 minute each. Okay, so these are our extrapolations based on the Garcia, and we did a similar process. We recorded this onto wax. We have the wax. We have the in situation, room recording. So you can imagine probably what this sounds like. Me singing on wax. Sort of lose the spectral color. But why don't we demonstrate it in the flesh? We have a different pitch because this is higher than the striker, so apologies for those that are pitch sensitive.
Do you want to say anything about what you're trying to do since
So what I'm trying to do with the chiaroscuro is very much trying to, and we'll have a look at this score, within particularly, say I'm just going to do the opening to the bottom of the page there, is what we're hearing with these ladies, and now this is very fresh revelations, is that they're using the vowels and they're using the chiaro and the scuro even on these hemidemis, these smaller values. But anytime there is a shift in the register, and they're really trying to make a very clear distinction, even with trills, that there is this constant oscillation of colour between the chiaro and scuro. That's why we're getting such clarity, I think, in the wax. So let's have a listen. Qual concento lo conosco, io sento nel mio cuore la mano di Sollina something like that.
And would you just, with the
slower little thing?
melismatic thing, just go slowly in it?
So what Christoph was trying to say, and he really believes that particularly with these smaller notes, that we have this so close, open, closed, open, closed, open. So you get very, very distinct tonal colour difference. So and then when you're coming down to the bottom, that you actually need to allow it to speak a bit more, and I think that's why we're getting those timbral colours when you hear the ladies really sort of dig in there, where we have the on occasion there is this yodel break where there's actually a certain amount of breath pressure behind the sound that we end up with this sort of resultant sort of passionate break. So these are what we are exploring. It's a very much steps in process. Yes.
So we're going to actually finish now because Inya's going to throw us off the stage in a second. Just go to the end. So the revelation, just to finish, the revelation really from this a few days ago when we were in Vienna, we had 2 days of working with Christoph, was just to realize that the chiaroscuro happens at the micro level. It doesn't just happen in chunks, one part's dark, one part's light, but actually it happens from note to note in these scaling patterns. And what we now can do, and I hope Inya will have us back, we'd like to re-record some of these things using that, and then seeing how that comes across. And the revelation will, I think, and even the girls have even said now, when they listen to Patty, they can hear it much better. So just that knowledge that has now been imparted to us can help us listen to the original wax recordings and hear more. Thank you. Thanks.
We have so much to share, that's the problem. There's so many exciting things going on, so sorry about running over time.